declared martial law to protect the country against Russian aggression. That's after Russia detained 3 Ukrainian Navy ships off the coast of Crimea on Sunday. Moscow says the vessels illegally entered its territorial waters in the Kerk strait, ignoring orders from the border service. Author and Russia analyst Martin Macaulay believes the actions taken by Ukraine could help boost Poroshenko's ratings.
It's an unprecedented situation with Ukraine declaring martial law. I can't remember any other case where they actually did that. One has to look at this really from a realpolitik point of view. Russia is the much stronger state. It's in control of these waters. It's in control of the Kerch Strait. And Ukraine really has to abide by Russian law, even though they may not accept it. The difficulty for the Ukrainians, of course, is what do you then do? President Poroshenko has now declared martial law, which is quite an extraordinary step to take. It will boost his ratings because he will come out as a savior of the nation. He will say, I'm here, I'm the president, I'm here to defend Ukraine and support me. But of course, he will not want war, he will not want a conflict. The Russians would win very easily because they're much, much stronger. And President Poroshenko knows that, every Ukrainian knows that, so they don't want a military conflict. They just want a conflict which will in fact increase the standing of the president and increase the standing of Ukraine. From the Russian point of view, they're acting, they would say, according to international maritime law and according to Russian law, and they were perfectly entitled to do what they did. The UN Security Council will debate it and probably call on both sides to cool it and to understand that this is a very, very dangerous situation and could escalate to a situation where there's really no going back because if one side attacks the other, then the other side will respond. And therefore, cool heads are needed here, and presumably...
RT's Murad Gazdev is in the city of Kerch and joined us live now. Murad, what does this declaration mean for the current situation?
Да, все, работает.
Murad, can you hear me? We're having a few technical difficulties there. Murad, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You can? Oh, brilliant.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
I'm just talking about the declaration and what it means for the current situation. Can you explain to us?
Well, it has very wide-reaching consequences that are mostly advantageous to the government, to the president of Ukraine. Recently, there's been some political turbulence. We're talking about thousands of people protesting all over Ukraine, protesting over new tariffs, protesting over lack of heating, over lack of hot water in this cold season. It's sub-zero temperatures in many parts of Ukraine. And now that martial law has been declared in Ukraine, protests become illegal because the country is supposed to, in theory, be entirely focused on war, on the war industry, on producing military goods, on supplying soldiers. In this case, however, most of the restrictions that we're hearing about will affect civilian life rather than military life. So the Ukrainian government will be able to censor all sorts of media outlets, be it news channels, newspapers, online publications, and remove any criticism of the Ukrainian government. It'll also be able to, for example, postpone elections, to delay elections. Elections, by the way, in which current President Poroshenko is in the polls. He's third, he's fourth. So he's the opposition to him, his rivals, being unable to start their campaigns, to criticize him, is only going to be an advantage for him. It'll give him time to consolidate Ukrainian society around him and to spread the message that this is all Russian aggression, because the Ukrainian president has been actively calling together the UN Security Council, the Ukraine NATO Council, the other organizations such as the Normandy 4, trying to get the message across that this is all Russian aggression. And Russia says that it has no illusions as to the reactions.
Насчет того, что Talking about the actions we're going to take at the UN Security Council, you know, we don't have any illusions, taking into account that the West has adopted a position of unconditional support for Poroshenko and his regime. But yesterday's calls from the EU to both Russia and Ukraine to exercise restraint made us think. If they ask Ukraine to do this, it means that Kiev has certainly done something that their Western sponsors do not approve of. I hope that the Ukrainian authorities will draw certain conclusions from that.
To go back to what happened yesterday, this incident that took place, the Russian version is that Ukraine violated its territorial waters. It all roots back to the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, which allows countries, third parties, third countries, to sail through, to navigate through the territorial waters of other countries, so long as they aren't temporarily restricted for whatever reason. The waters around the Kerk strait, the Kerk bridge yesterday, were restricted. They were temporarily closed. Ukraine knew this, and according to the law of the sea, they couldn't have passed. The other argument here is, of course, that Ukraine doesn't recognize these waters as Russian, which is what some Ukrainians are saying, which doesn't mesh because previously Ukraine always notified the Russian side that they were going to travel through the Kerch Strait. They sent notification ahead. They were given guides to guide them through the narrow passage. This time, however, they chose to barge through, literally barge through. The latest videos we've seen show Ukrainian vessels, the three vessels right behind me, impounded now together. Their sailors jailed for now. Those three vessels maneuvering dangerously next to huge queues of vessels that were waiting to pass through the Kerch Strait. And the Russians said that they were forced to employ weapons in order to stop the Ukrainian maneuvering. Ukraine claims that it did notify the Russian side that its ships, its vessels, naval vessels, were going to pass through the Kerch Strait under the Kerch bridge. The Russians say they received no such notification, which is why this incident took place, why this chase took place. The Ukrainian side, though, says this was a provocation by the Russian side. This was uncalled for, and that this was another act, an open act of war, an act of aggression against the Ukrainian state.
Contrary to the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea and the treaty between Ukraine and the Russian Federation on cooperation on the use of the Azov Sea and the Kerch Strait, Russian border ships carried out a frankly aggressive action against the vessels of the Navy of the Armed Forces of Ukraine.
Undoubtedly, we'll be hearing much more reaction coming in from various organizations, the UN, various countries, as well as details emerge and countries decide which way they lean. But Russia did, Mr. Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, did say that, you know, the messages we've heard so far from NATO, from the EU, calling for de-escalation, calling for both sides to calm down and to behave coolly, to behave calmly in a rational manner, well, that speaks volumes. For now, though, Ukraine is calling on Russia to release the 24 or so jailed sailors, 3 of them injured, though no life-threatening injuries, and to release the 3 vessels impounded behind my back. So far, the Russian state says that the sailors will be prosecuted for illegally entering Russian territorial waters.
Okay, I'm sure we're going to